with Mike and Billy.
Welcome back in, everybody. Golf Talk Radio with Mike and Billy right here on ESPN Radio, Golf Talk Radio Network. We're going to jump right into our first interview of the show, and on the line we have the one and only Mr. Jeff Sheets with JeffSheetsGolf.com. It's SHEETS Golf.com. Excuse me. Jeff is a golf club designer, golf club developer, sourcer, and a consultant as well. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be with you guys. How are you doing this morning?
Very, very well. We're doing great. How about you?
Doing well. I'm out here in Austin, Texas, and we're just trying to get above freezing here right now.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful, sunny winter day.
Okay, don't tell them what it's like here.
Well, where I live 30 miles from here, Jeff, we get some freezing in the morning too, so I can relate to you. Mr. Schmandel on the other side here, on the other hand, cannot.
What was it, 75 yesterday?
Yeah, life is rough where you're at, isn't it?
It was a little chilly, but it wasn't bad.
Hey, Jeff, we're really...
First of all, Jeff, thanks for getting back to me. I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we really are excited to have you on the show. After doing a lot of research over the last day here, going to your website, JeffSheetsGolf.com, and checking everything out on your site as we're putting together questions for the interview, I'm thinking, well, we could probably talk with Jeff all day. So what we thought we would do is just throw a few things out there, kind of see what sticks and let it run. And I'm sure you've got plenty to say with all your experience in golf design and golf club development. But before we jump in there, can you give us a little background just on you personally?
Well, I began golf rather late in life. I was in my late 20s when I was introduced to had a boss that actually kind of pulled me aside and started instructing me. He had been an all-services golfer, retired Navy, and long story short, we worked together for quite a few years, and one day he said, I'm tired of these corporate politics. I'm going to go to the San Diego Golf Academy and become a club professional, get my credentials. And he decided to get into the equipment side of the business as opposed to the club professional side. And I was very fortunate that the first opportunity I had handed to me was working out on the PGA Tour in what was back then called Brunswick Golf, which evolved into the rifle shafts and precision frequency matching shafts. And in the late 80s, started traveling the PGA Tour as a full-time job, going from tournament to tournament, working with the best players in the world, and just kind of all evolved from there.
So as you're doing this on the PGA Tour, did they give you your own like travel van like they do now with these tour vans and different things like that where you're working on players' clubs?
That's exactly it. I started off in a 35-foot long Airstream RV, which was converted to a shaft lab. And back then we were focusing primarily on iron shafts, frequency matching the sets together. And while that's not an uncommon practice now, it was very cutting edge back in the 80s. And working with players with their iron shafts is a much more challenging endeavor than trying to fit someone into a wedge or a putter or a driver, because you've got so many different lofts within the set that could vary off from, let's say the long irons are good, but the short iron shafts might float on you or something. Basically, it's a very challenging environment when you're working with a tour player. It's not as simple as, okay, yeah, these shafts are right, and off they go with their new set, and you never hear back from them again. It's always a work in process when you're trying to evolve from either one shaft flex to another, one shaft model to another, or from one brand to another. It can be very painstakingly and time-consuming.
So, as you mentioned, the terminology we're gonna talk about this, the golf equipment terminology. We're gonna talk about it later on in the show, and I thought you just the word you used or terminology you used was frequency matching. So, for our listeners, probably 20% of the people might know exactly what that means. What is frequency matching with iron shafts? What are you trying to do?
It's a pain.
Essentially, what you're trying to do is get a linear relationship from a cycles per minute or an oscillation basis throughout the set. So, for instance, if you have a certain tempo and swing speed and you swing the same club, whether it be your frequency match, the shaft should load and unload and release and present every club in the set. And when we see sets that are not frequency matched, for instance, you might in between 5-iron and so on and so forth, every club, even though you might put your own natural swing, different launch angle, a ball flight pattern, which on one shaft would fade on you and on another shaft would hook on you. And so trying to get everything in the set matched to perfection so that you end up with a very predictable type of trajectory and ball flight from every club in the bag is the intent of frequency matching your iron sets.
So another item that just came to mind as you were talking about this frequency matched in tour players, what about the amateur, the golfing Joe that buys a set of clubs? Are those irons frequency matched?
All irons, if you can get them frequency matched, should be. It's actually more critical to an amateur than to a tour. One of my early days in the tour van, when Lee Trevino was still on the PGA Tour, before he was on the senior, back then, what's today the Champions Tour, we were at a tournament. The head pro from that club was in the tour van, just rubbing elbows with the tour players coming through, and he was asking about the frequency match, and he said, "Well, that's not really important for my members. None of my members have a repeatable swing." And Trevino turned to him and said, "Pro," he goes, "how many times have you been on a par 5 and you're sitting there on the green and someone comes up to the tee box and you can't tell who they are, and that first person slices to the next fairway, you go, oh, there's Mr. Brown, and the next guy tops it, and you go, oh, there's Mr. Smith, and the next guy hooks it to the other fairway." He goes, "You can recognize your club member swings.
Right.
They're inconsistent, but they're still swinging within their own rhythm and their own tempo. And anything that we can do to make the equipment consistent, so you take the variable of inconsistent equipment out of the equation, it just helps, whether it's a professional tour player or a weekend hack, you're just taking one element of unpredictability out of their hands."
That is so true.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir on this one, Jeff. I've just said that so many times. And the touring pro, they can adjust. They can adapt a lot more easily than the regular human.
Yeah, that's amazing. Again, joining us here, we have Jeff Sheets from jeffsheetsgolf.com, SHEETS golf.com. Jeff, when we look at your portfolio of work with the different club companies, it really is pretty incredible. I mean, you've got Hogan, Wilson, Golfsmith, Founders Club, McGregor, Lynx. I mean, it just keeps going on and on and on. Out of all the projects you've done throughout your career or companies you've worked with, is there one that sits at the top for you? And who is it and why?
It would probably have to be working for the Hogan Company. I'd always been definitely an admirer of Mr. Hogan. And when I first started working out on the PGA Tour, I was working for a shaft company. And being a shaft company representative, you worked with all of the OEMs. And the staff that Hogan had out there over those first few years I was on tour, just a outstanding staff of touring professionals that you admired. And I remember my first year on tour, every single staff member won a tournament that year. And I just admired Mr. Hogan, his philosophy with equipment and all of that. And I always said, one day I'd love to work for the Hogan Company. And fast forward ahead about 15 years, I'm working for Spalding Sporting Goods, in charge of the Top Flight product line, which back then was a pro line company. And Spalding ended up purchasing. So I suddenly found myself as director of research and development for the Hogan Company. And the product I started working on to relaunch that brand was the 1999 Hogan Apex irons and the Apex Plus.
Wow.
And the reason why that product is near and dear to me is because of all the brands of equipment out there, those who have followed the Hogan brand really understand its roots, its values. It's close to them, and they're really aficionados of irons. Mm. And to this day, I still have numerous people that come up and say, "Wow, that 99 Apex is just incredible. I still play that, or that had been my gamer set for so many years. I've designed well over 500 clubs that have been commercialized, gone to market for different brands. But the people that buy those other brands don't have the endearment to those brands like those that really love the Hogan brand. And so there's just roots run deep with that brand, and there's always a great association with it.
That was a beautiful iron.
Yeah, you can hear that in your voice, how near and dear to your heart the Hogan Company is. Did you, when you say you developed the irons, did you also have a hand in developing the shafts? Because didn't the Apex have their own Apex shafts in them as well?
Yeah, the Apex shafts preceded my involvement with the company by many years. Those were developed, I'm going to say, early 1980s. And that's still a shaft that many golfers wish they can get their hands on. I'm just dealing with, Swing Science, one of the companies that I do work for, doing some work with Bernard Longer right now on their Epon irons, and he's trying to get some Apex shafts, and we're trying to find a good substitute for him. Those shafts are just loved by many, still played out on tour by a handful of touring professionals, but even though they have such a great history, they haven't been produced in probably a decade.
It's been a while.
That's amazing. It's a testament to the product there for sure. You mentioned over 500 clubhead designs that you have. You have more than 20 patents as well.
Yeah.
What are some of your top clubhead designs that people might know out there?
The Wilson Fat Shaft product line, the Deep Reds.
Yes. Yeah.
I ended up joining the Wilson company after they had already introduced the Fat Shaft, but I launched the Deep Red product line with them. And going back to Founders Club, that was the first equipment company that I'd gone from the shaft business over to the OEM side and started doing work for. Back then, it was a pretty small team. There's this guy there that I worked with named Bob Vokey, and he was cutting his teeth at the same time.
Just Bob Vokey, yeah.
Actually, my very first patent, and I think it's also Bob's very first patent, we shared together on a putter, of all things.
Really?
Was it a Founders putter?
Yes, it was. It was one we designed along with Dave Stockton, and to this day, I'd like to get my hands on one. It's been we didn't produce a whole lot of them, but I know there's still a few floating out there.
I have to tell you, when I was I've been down here in the San Luis Obispo area in the county for quite a long time now, 30-some years. But in the early 90s, I was just finishing up Cal Poly, and that's when I kind of decided to step into the golf business. Pro, Scott Sickett, beautiful.
They were great golf clubs.
And, there wasn't really anything quite like it out there. And I do remember the putters as well. I do remember all that. So it's a beautiful golf club, absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to kind of segue with that, when we talk about driver development, we talked a little bit about irons, but now you talk about driver development and you look at, club technologies going with drivers especially, you would think they'd run out of things to do. And you get the M1s coming out, the M2 with all its adjustability and slides and weights.
Now the 3 and 4.
Now the 3 and 4, and now you got a twist face, and then you got the Callaway Epic with jailbreak technology and all that. How do you see, or where do you see all this going? How do you guys, you personally, in your experience, like with Founders Club, where does that start, and how do you get something like that going? I mean, these are some pretty amazing designs.
Well, when it comes to driver design, you look at what shortcomings could be on your objectives in the design process. For a company like Callaway to arrive at jailbreak technology versus someone like TaylorMade arriving at their M3, M4 technologies, you have your engineering staffs kind of sent off in completely different directions from one another. That is actually, to me, more interesting than what we've been seeing for the past decade with driver design. I joined into the industry when wooden woods and saw that evolution move on to metal woods and then on to titanium woods. And then, over the past 25 years, we've seen those woods just blow up in size from around 200 cc volume for a driver up to 460. And a lot of the advancement in driver development was over this past quarter of a century, because all you're doing is you're just trying to push the envelope so that you can manipulate the volume up to a larger head size, which gives you a higher moment of inertia. And for your listeners, moment of inertia relates to how forgiving or how stable that head will be on an off-center impact. And the higher the MOI, the more stable that head becomes. And just by sheer increasing the volume of that head size, you end up with a higher moment of inertia. But after the manufacturers hit that 460 limit that the USGA cuts it off at, then that's where the interesting work really started occurring. What do? You've got your head up to 460 cc's, and then you have this other restriction that the USGA gives you called CT, characteristic time. And that is basically putting a limit to the coefficient of restitution of the face material. And for your listeners that don't know what that is, basically the face of a metal wood is very much like a trampoline. And you hit the center of the face, just like you hit the center of a trampoline, you're going to get a rebound effect. And the USGA has put a restriction on how spring-like that whine and groan when the USGA comes out with new rules saying we're putting a limit on this and a limit on that. I've never complained because, it's a level playing field. Everybody has to play by those rules. And so quite often you take the rules themselves and look at how can I take this limitation the USGA has thrown at us and provide a golf club that's better, even with this new limitation in place, than it was before. And quite often that becomes a pursuit. So, for instance, one of the most recent USGA rules was enacted in March of 2016, and it had to do with the CT on the face, saying that the USGA is now creating a band on the face that's 1.67 inches wide. And in that 1.67 inch wide area, they're calling that the USGA impact area, the CT has a limit of 257 microseconds, which is the dwell time on a particular measuring device that the ball remains on the face before it springs off. The higher that figure, the faster the ball will spring off, and the lower the figure, the slower. And so 257 is the limit, and it's been the limit for since the early 2000s. But it said anything outside of that 1.67 inch area towards the heel and toe can now go up to 275. Manufacturers looked at that and said, what's the big deal? You jump in the center of that trampoline, you can spring pretty high. You jump on the edge, you're not going to go very far. Physics itself doesn't allow for that, but the USGA is saying, hey, you can actually spring off farther from the edge now than you can from the center. And I know for a fact that has now been achieved because I'm working with the manufacturer and we've achieved it.
Wow.
So quite often the roadblocks that are put up are sometimes thrown down the gauntlet as an engineering challenge. USGA says you can do this within these limits. Let's see if we can do it within those limits. Well,
and you being an engineer, that challenge is probably also what drives you. That's got to be incentive for you as well to get in there and try to figure out how are you going to make that work in these parameters.
It does. It definitely makes you think outside the box. If I went back and I had the knowledge in golf club engineering today, back almost 30 years ago when I got into the equipment side of the business, I would be a genius. I'd be walking on water. But this is all learned.
Yeah.
I'm no more intelligent than someone in R&D at Callaway or TaylorMade or any of the other big companies. We've all learned this collectively as an industry on what can be done and where limitations are, and how you choose to exploit one of those limitations is really what the challenge of the OEMs or anybody in the equipment business looking at as far as golf club and particularly driver development these days.
Well, Jeff, I hate to do this to you because like I said in the beginning of the interview, I knew we could talk to you forever. We're coming up against a national break here, so we're going to have to break. Could we get you back on the show another time?
Certainly.
Okay, we'd love to have you. I mean, we just touched the tip of the iceberg here, and I know we could keep going, but again, Sheets, JeffSheetsGolf.com, SHEETS golf.com. You guys should check it out. Golf club design, golf club development, sourcing and consulting, and
we
I think
didn't
Dave has
get a
something
chance to talk about tour stories.
I know
but,
that's. I mean, it just
Jeff,
could go on and on and on. So.
Real quick question: do you have any
Yes, sir.
predictions, new materials, head designs, or anything that might be a breakthrough in the future?
Not industry-wide. You know, the last industry-wide head material that just really changed the landscape was titanium.
Titanium, yeah.
We've looked at so many materials over the years, and a lot of companies will dabble with different materials to help supplement construction of a head, but we've not run across a material that would completely replace something like titanium in a driver head yet.
Well, thank you again, Jeff. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
JeffSheetsGolf.com, and we'll be getting back in touch with you real soon and getting you back on, and obviously at your convenience. So we appreciate your time.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you,
Jeff.
My
Jeff.
pleasure.
Bye-bye. And with that, we'll be right back. It's Golf Talk Radio with Mike and Billy, brought to you by Health IQ. Check out golftalkradio.com today to see what you can save, and click on the healthiq.com banner. Use the promo code Golf Talk. We'll be right back. Golf Talk Radio with Mike and Billy right here on the Golf Talk Radio Network.